You're live.
Okay, so good morning still.
It is good morning.
It is Tuesday, April 30th. In Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, we have wrangled somewhat on a bill that we hope to vote out this week. And we might have a far-ranging discussion before noon. Actually, just before 11:45. Let's just wrap up at 11:45 for everybody's sake. About the bills we have left in committee. But let's start with H612 since Commissioner Pepper, I don't know if it's Board Chair Pepper, has graciously agreed to be here on short notice, just so we can talk as freely as he feels comfortable about what's going on with H612 and our role.
That's great. Yeah, and I really appreciate all the time you spent on this. You know, cannabis, it needs constant kind of updates every year. We notice new things very early in the market. We hear about problems. There's even problems that have come up since this bill has been introduced, but that we've been able to correct. You know, I think that there's just a few outstanding issues. Certainly, you know, you have certain sections of the bill. I think sections 1 and section 12 are being looked at by the Agriculture Committee. All of the medical sections, which is kind of the majority of the middle part of the bill, are being looked at health and welfare. I know that there was some questions at your last meeting around the siting of outdoor cannabis cultivation.
Right.
And I think there's outstanding issues around cannabis business development.
Okay, yes.
And potentially some advertising issues.
Right.
So I'm happy to talk, kind of pick things up where you left off at your last meeting. With respect to siting of outdoor cannabis cultivation, right now there is no siting. That was not an authority that you granted the board in rulemaking. There's never a mention of buffer zones or setbacks or siting of agriculture. It was essentially a local decision. And then slowly over the course of a number of years, that got whittled away. So then, you know, we're seeing a few issues around the state. I think there's 3 notable ones of people that are growing close to their property line that are causing some odor issues with neighbors. I should say that outdoor cultivation, one other complaint that we got was people using artificial lighting for outdoor cultivation. That was an issue in Charlotte. That was an illegal use of outdoor lighting. And so we've gotten that person back into compliance.
Okay.
So it's
Senator Clarkson and Senator Harrison.
Was it illegal? Was it not allowed because of the municipal regulations?
It was-
Ordinance.
it was not, it may have been an ordinance, but it wasn't allowed by our rules either.
Oh, your rule.
Outdoor cultivation, the definition is no artificial lighting.
Okay.
Oh,
that
so
can
you
include-
include, because.
Some people need supplemental lighting for certain reasons and
How
we
precious
just,
of you.
and we just say, get an indoor license if you want supplemental lighting.
So they can't even do outdoor lighting in the day.
The goal is to get kind of 12 hours of dark, 12 hours of light.
Okay,
So in
okay.
certain, like the shoulder months, people usually want some additional
okay.
outdoor.
But you don't see farmers with grow lights outside on their courtrooms. I mean.
No, that's fair, yeah, we're trying to compare it to
Use
agriculture.
grow lights outside.
But I doubt that lights are prohibited, it would just be so expensive.
Okay, so
Okay.
So
Yeah.
the siting issue, when this came up in the House, the original standard, you know, we evaluated it, it just seemed unworkable. There was
Mhm.
issues around kind of whether a structure on the house was connected to municipal water or the kind of density of population within a 1-mile radius of the actual site. These are things that aren't well mapped at this stage. We just didn't know how to effectively implement that.
Mhm.
So the standard moved to what you see in the bill. It's a very clear, bright line standard. You know, the town can create a agriculture cultivation district and have certain setbacks. Everything else in the town has larger setback potential. Towns with no zoning can have a default setback. That is a clear standard, so it's okay with us. But I know that this is somewhat controversial and probably will have the effect of impacting people more than just the 3 cases that we see. You know, we will, upon renewal, have to kind of pull existing cultivators licenses because of it.
Mhm.
So I don't know how many, you know, we have 400 cultivators, 60% of those are outdoor. I
Yeah.
don't know which percentage of those would be impacted by this setback.
Mhm.
I would just say that part of the legislative intent of Acts 164, which passed in 2020, created the board. You wrote that it is your it's the intent of the General Assembly to encourage participation by small farmers in kind of the existing illicit market.
Mhm.
I can tell you that the existing illicit market was largely growing in their spare bedroom or in their garage.
Yeah.
Now that it's legal, they're moving outside. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the land that they have.
Right.
You know? So I think certainly a setback is a reasonable thing to discuss,
Mhm.
but it's purely a decision for you, how far you want that kind of.
Right.
And if you need any information from the board, we can try to provide it in the kind of short amount of time we have.
Senator Clarkson.
Well, I'm just curious, the current setbacks we have, that came to us in the bill, were those recommendations from you, or were those organic, they developed out of the discussion of the committee?
It was a committee decision.
Okay,
Our
so
only.
I think, and this is why it's an ag, I think we need sort of some fact-based information about setbacks and impact, and I mean, we have different types of setbacks in buffer zones and, you know, in all sorts of ways, in lawn and in our. The difference with this crop, I think, is the smell, which is impactful and different from other things that we cultivate. Yeah, there just isn't that same smell from corn or from soybeans or from beans or whatever. you're growing.
Manure.
Right, and
Brussels
we have
sprouts.
Yeah, I grow Brussels sprouts.
Or hemp.
Or
I mean,
hemp
is the
or
same.
Okay, okay.
Nothing is worse.
Well, yeah, no, so there are other things, but generally, crops we grow do not. Animals make obviously make smell.
So I will say this, and it's not scientific, and I do
Yeah,
plan
and
to
we
talk
need
to
scientific.
Senator Starr. I wanted to come with some sense of like where we all were, because it's a balance of cultivation and
Yeah.
someone's business that they've already developed. So it's kind of half our jurisdiction.
Well, the
And
other balance is the
Mhm.
neighborhood. I mean, we're talking
Yeah,
residential,
so
so this is not
what-
like we're talking out.
what Representative Byron is proposing, who spent the most time on this, and I just want to run it by the committee.
Yeah.
And then run it by agriculture, is that the cannabis cultivation district setback would be taken from 25 feet to 15 feet. Because we want to encourage them, but we also don't want to encourage them more than not having a cannabis cultivation district in either case. You know, we want to identify them, and I think this would actually be kind of punitive to cannabis cultivation districts. And then looking at the setback outside of a cannabis cultivation district, but in an area with some kind of zoning or setback, moving that from 100 feet to 50 feet. So the other thing that I wanted to contemplate was some kind of study or flexible language for you all to take into account.
Yeah,
More
I mean,
than
there
case by
needs to be
case
science
study.
on this.
But barring that, that's sort of what I wanted to put on the table to see what you think and what others think before I just, you know, yeah.
I actually think it would be great if we didn't ask for a study, but asked for recommendations in January of 25 or earlier from the agency and from, you know, their stakeholders and
Mhm.
scientists to make recommendations.
So
on
no,
setbacks.
no setback changes.
No
until then.
specific setbacks, and in fact, ask for recommendations from those who know and take into account the issues that the setbacks are getting us to discuss. I mean,
Mhm.
and I think we have to take into account residential neighborhoods and, you know, fairly densely packed communities. And we have, you know, we have to be, it is a balancing act, but it's a balancing act of three things.
Do you have permit decisions coming up before January?
Yeah, our renewal process and initial application is a rolling process.
Can't you do a stay for outdoor cultivation in residential neighborhoods for, you know, the 6 months? I mean, we're only talking 6 months.
To new ones or
Yeah.
to the existing?
Well, I mean, existing ones already exist.
Mm.
Right?
I think people were asking specifically for relief in these residential areas, so the policy
So
question
maybe-
is,
got it.
are we gonna leave the status quo alone and study it or get recommendations, or are we going to limit?
How about, you know,
Okay, we do
We
like
could-
interim.
we like interim, we
Right.
could consider an interim, but I would recommend for the full blown statutory setbacks that we
Right.
actually get a little more science under our belt and get recommendations from the agriculture professionals before we set something in stone.
And before we create a cannabis cultivation district, maybe, I don't really know exactly what that is right now.
I mean, to me, a cannabis patch in a residential area
Mm-hmm.
could be an attractive nuisance for adolescents.
Mm-hmm.
There's
In a
that.
way, corn is an attractive nuisance for deer or raccoons, you know. But this isn't a food crop.
Mm-hmm.
There is.
Yeah, can we set some kind of flexible interim guideline about you weighing the density of a residential area
Yeah.
against a setback and then come back with recommendations for, this is one that I agree, like, we haven't even had time to think about what a cannabis cultivation district is. The setbacks haven't been based on anything that's like really solid.
Talk before we do anything to some planning, a town planner or zoning.
Yeah.
And find out the issues
Right.
that they have.
I mean, we don't have a lot of time. Essex came into House GovOps. They sent us a letter. I think that's on our. Or did they send us a letter?
I think they might.
Yeah, so they sent us a letter. They, I think, were the only municipality that the House heard from.
Yes.
The House also heard from local growers. And I'm trying not to open the floodgates to that because I don't even know how much time we have. So I think what we should do is try to do less harm
Right.
I
in the
agree.
meantime and get better recommendations for next year. The question is, do we want to provide some relief in these residential areas for that?
See, maybe we've got a letter, I'll go find out if somebody tell me what day it was posted.
Yeah.
But
We can
I
send
don't
it to you.
feel
Yeah,
I understand. We haven't had witnesses, so I don't
yeah,
feel like I understand, and I don't want to make a decision that could do more harm than good. I don't know how serious the issue is.
Mhm.
Or how prevalent, we know about one.
So,
And
I
maybe
think we
two.
might wanna prevent others
right,
if we think that growing in residential one, when you get enough land to grow.
right,
So probably res two or three is, I don't know, do we allow res three anymore? Not if it has acre zoning. There you might be able to grow without having serious impact,
right,
but residential two.
yeah. I mean, Pepper, if you could respond, because this bill could just die, right? I mean, I'm not saying one way or the other how I feel, but we are running out of time. And medical marijuana may be championed elsewhere if that happens. There are still vehicles, outdoor cultivation might be championed elsewhere, but what would you like to see out of the process? And I'm sorry that that's
Yeah. I mean,
a political question.
No. I mean, I think leaving this discretionary point up to the board is challenging for us. Because we see this as pure policy. Where is outdoor cultivation gonna happen? Can it happen, it's gotta be by law blocked from public view, but can it happen right up next to someone's house? Can it happen on the roof of an
Right.
apartment building? These are questions that we really look to your judgment on. We just need a clear standard that is enforceable. When people are saying kind of don't do densely populated areas, well, what if the main house is in a densely populated area, but this is in the back 40,
Well, then they have a setback that doesn't
Yeah.
kill their business.
To me,
I would say.
the best thing that you can do
Yeah.
for me is give us a clear standard, and if you don't wanna do damage in the meantime, what you could say is something along the lines of 50-foot setback from all property lines for every new application. And then let's.
Interim measure.
As an interim for a year, and then let's kind of study what the impact of doing kind of a agricultural zone, whatever they're called, cultivation
Mhm.
zones. And what kind of impact it would have to the existing licensees, how big of a problem is this, what are some of the kind of odor mitigation,
Mhm.
strategies. I know Massachusetts is a home rule state, and so the municipalities have a lot more authority on outdoor cultivation.
Right,
And they have kind of a, for lack of a better term, like an Act 250 process where
Right.
cultivators come and they explain what sort of mitigation they're gonna do just from a visual, like an aesthetic point of view, and from an odor point of view. And if it's good enough for the select board, then they approve it. It's not such, it's a case by case basis. It's not
right.
a kind of hard, fast.
Right, so let's say we did that and it was new application. Would that bring in people who are reapplying? Or it would only be for new citing, like a whole new application?
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion of this in the House, that it says whether these, zoning decisions, citing decisions have retroactive application. It sounds to me like for the vast majority of them, yes, like a renewal is a new license. So whatever laws have changed or regulations have changed in the interim will apply to a
Okay,
new application.
okay,
So you kind of fix the Essex Junction problem by leaving things as is. But if you clarify that you want it to be an interim measure and only applicable to new applications, you'd have to probably spell that out in statute.
okay, so clarify that we are looking at existing businesses as they come up for renewal or not.
Or
We
not,
have to be
exactly.
clear about that. If it helps, I mean, it's been informal because, we have letters and we have a short process and the question is, does this bill live or not? I believe Essex Junction was the only municipality to testify. It's about a very specific case. The vice chair of government operations confirmed a 50-foot setback would curtail the nuisance of this particular case. Doesn't know how it will affect others that aren't receiving complaints. So I think the question on the table is still, can we give municipalities a tool to deal with nuisances versus end something that we don't know how it will impact others? Senator Clark.
So I would boldly accept the chair's recommendation that we consider an interim measure of 50 feet.
Okay.
And that we, in fact, give,
Applying retroactively when an existing business comes back.
exactly, thank
Okay.
you. And then asking for recommendations from, you don't want to be making the recommendations, I understand.
We can
But I
assemble
think working with
stakeholders
the
or
state-
whatever.
That would be good,
Yes.
that would be good.
The thing we can do is tell you what the impact of that 50 feet would be, or the impact of various.
Well,
statutes.
if you with
If you
others-
could do that in the next few days or whatever, anyway, that would be helpful.
I can try. I mean,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
again,
you
it's
can try.
kind of a, yes.
Yeah, but that wasn't, so the interim measure, I think of 50 feet is fine.
Right,
I think that asking though, really looking at what a cultivation district is, how it is applied, and what its impact is in municipalities with zoning, without zoning. Those recommendations for a final statutory recommendation seem to me need more time and more stakeholders involved, and they need the towns, they need ag, they need A&R, and maybe you too. Cause even, I know you don't wanna be involved in that necessarily, but I think you need to be a partner in it. And ask for recommendations back for next year. I just don't think we've had enough time to really.
do you
think
feel
about it.
comfortable with that language without an appropriation? Because that's what would be.
I think so. I mean, we've held a number of municipal roundtables. We have stakeholder engagement
Yeah.
quite frequently. We have, monthly stakeholder engagement, just informational sessions, networking events. It's not that, it doesn't change things all that much to just ask some specific questions. At those, I don't want them to be seen as the board's recommendations on these. I think what I would like to do is
Okay.
evaluate the impacts
Yeah.
of various buffers.
Right. I think the NRV just did a good job of that,
Yeah.
the stakeholders are able to say, here's where we had a little disagreement, but
Right.
Yeah.
this is largely what we could agree on, even if that isn't everything.
Right.
Coming back to us with where the stakeholder group could agree
Sure.
is enormously helpful
Yeah.
to us, because otherwise we'll do a bad job of it in here.
And I
Big
think
way for
we-
some losers.
yes. I agree.
It's helpful as a goal, but then,
Uh-huh.
and we're having trouble with details now on the other example. But just, can I,
But it was a goal that's keeping
Oh, yeah.
things together
No,
while
and
we
it's-
sort out.
And
the
it's good
timing.
to have a
Yeah.
vision, actually.
Right.
So, I'm sorry, let me just understand, so are we thinking this bill is not gonna go through?
I see. This
I'm
was-
not saying one way or the other, but I'm just saying that's a real possibility if
Okay.
we try to do a better job on the process. We have this week,
Okay,
so maybe not even the full week, so.
so,
I'm trying to get agreement with the House while we go through this here. Because it otherwise, if people are too attached to any one thing, it could just die in conference. And I heard Pepper say that outdoor cultivation, something right now would be good,
okay,
which means some of these pieces have to live and we might care about getting to other pieces. And again,
okay,
this was time we found. I hope we can move this week.
I'd like to move this
so
Yeah.
you just want an okay on the 50 feet right now,
as an interim.
or in this 2 minutes?
An okay on the 50 feet and whether or not it's retroactive.
Yeah,
And
or
that's important to you, to have it.
applicable
Either way,
to,
he just needs certainty.
reauthorization, I would say, cause you can't really go back in time in this.
No, if an yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
just shorthand for
yeah,
an
yeah.
existing business.
I think it should be,
Okay.
personally.
Okay.
Now, but you say the Essex Junction situation is fixed by leaving it as it is.
If you look,
You left it at
Do we have time? Oh, leaving the language as it is.
right,
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
it's
I
pretty,
misunderstood.
But it impacts maybe 200 other growers, is I think. what-
at least 60% of 400, so yeah, 240.
But they're not all growing in residential neighborhoods.
No, that's the universe of outdoor cultivators.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
oh, okay, that's
It's-
helpful.
Yeah, I mean, there aren't
It's
that
not
many that are
common.
growing in,
No,
in
no.
densely
Okay,
populated.
so yeah, I mean, back to what Senator Cummings said,
What was that number again? I'm sorry.
Oh,
If we could say
we have
the densest category.
It's roughly 240.
This person's on less than
Universe
half
of
the
outdoor
acre.
cultivators. We don't know what the impact. each
There is that
individual
field in the center of the
Right.
houses.
Yeah,
Somebody could cultivate there,
right.
which.
We
owned by
could
the
say
city
something
right
like,
now, but if it went into private.
Yeah. if your parcel is less than an acre, there's some kind of subjective
that-
decision.
I like that because then, those are, well, I should just say, it's a clear standard.
Mm-hmm,
And that those are the parcels you're worried about is the
Yeah.
neighbor impacts. you know?
right. And then who would be able to make a more subjective decision less than an acre?
How about the 10?
You don't want that power.
I don't care. I mean,
Okay.
like honestly, like when we had a backlog of applications,
Yeah.
a town is allowed to sit on these applications and do nothing for up to
Mm,
60 days before we deem them accepted by default.
Okay, yeah,
But they could, I mean, if they wanted to, just, put it on agenda and move it from the agenda, we would consider that taking action, some kind of action. They could sit on a application indefinitely if they wanted to.
okay. So how do people feel about saying
I
it's
just have
less
a
than an acre?
question.
Yeah,
Too, and that is, let's say you have a cultivation in a densely populated area on relatively speaking, a small plot of land that has housing around it and light. And let's say a group of kids routinely go in and do self-harvesting. What would prevent that? Anything?
Well, cannabis only has value when it's flowering. So it's about 3 weeks out of the year that it actually has value that a kid would want to come and steal something. We have security requirements and we have a list of best practices and depending on how large you are as a cultivator, you have to use, either 1, 3, or all of them. In order to secure your cannabis, we have the authority, if we see any sort of theft or any sort of kind of potential for theft, to increase the in kind
And
of the
has
size.
it been a problem at all?
No, we haven't had a single report. We've had like 1 or 2 reported cases, but they don't want to go to the police and they won't kind of really tell us about it. And so it's kind of like we've investigated them. The investigations lead nowhere.
Mhm.
It's not a huge problem, I think, mostly because we did home grow first and, we've had this plant is ubiquitous in Vermont pretty much. And we have, at least at one point, large fields of hemp, which are visually indistinguishable from cannabis, for most people. And so the theft has not materialized, but, it's certainly in a densely populated area. There's more of a potential for it than in kind of a back and forth.
Can you tell me how things like that are secured in this populated area based on the standards that you've had? What do they do?
Well, I mean, it can't be visible from a public road, so there's almost always fencing around it. You know, we also require that during that harvest period that you have a physical presence with the plant, so, you know, and then
24 hours a day,
just during that harvest period.
just during the harvest period?
Yeah, and then, you know, we have alternatives like automatic lights, cameras, you know, you can choose from a menu of options if you're a smaller cultivator. If you're larger, which probably isn't the case for most densely populated areas, you have to do a lot more too. So
And those are in rules.
those are in rule. You gave us the authority to write rules around security measures. So that's what we did.
Do people feel comfortable with the question on the table, less than an acre? And this, I just think you're the most objective, honestly. I mean, like, every town is gonna treat this differently. I think you have seen the most of what's working and not working, and I think that citing authority in rulemaking should go to you.
Yeah, the only thing
Yeah.
that gives me pause about that is this is a decision that's going to make or break certain businesses. And we're an unelected body, you know, we take public comment and we go through LCAR the same as any other public body. But, you know, there's no accountability to us if people don't like our decisions around
I mean,
certain things.
Yes, and we oversee you versus every town making a different decision. And we would have less control over that in the interim. You can come back to us and say, you know what, this isn't working.
Right.
As opposed to all the different towns saying, you can't do this at all, or you can do, you know, I just don't want 252 different standards.
No, I know. You know, to me, I think the best thing that we can do, you know, our job is to make this market look the way you all want it to look. You know, like not to kind of substitute our judgment for yours. The best thing that I think that the board can provide to you is what would be the impact of the existing cultivators of the various, you know, a
Yeah.
15-foot setback, a 25-foot, a
Right.
50, 100, you know, how many people would that impact of the existing cultivators?
Right.
How would it change their operations? And maybe some recommendations around what other states are doing for odor mitigation or kind of these aesthetic concerns of
Right.
neighbors, like some of the things that you might empower towns to impose
Right.
on outdoor cannabis cultivators in order to mitigate some of the
Right.
harms.
And we haven't had any testimony, obviously.
No,
about this.
you know, and then one thing I worry about is like, everything I've heard from the House is the pro and con of this guy who has stuff at marijuana in Essex Junction. And that's kind of why I was asking you for who this impacts in a real sense, if you know, I mean, I know that there's this many outdoor cultivators, but then is there a universe you could seek for us of who would be impacted?
Yeah.
I'd like to go back to the House and say, we can't do something that impacts way more people for one guy who's causing a problem if maybe Essex Junction could deal with it themselves.
Right, I mean, I guess one of the questions we have,
Right.
of the 60% who are outdoor cultivators, how many are cultivating outdoors in
On less than an acre or something.
Right.
in a downtown or village
Right.
center? Because quite frankly, we all go to our own parcels to.
Right.
You know, we have almost an acre in downtown Woodstock. It would not, 50 feet isn't that much of a setback for when you're in the middle of a densely populated area. I just think for a permanent rule, I'm happy to consider an interim one, but I think it is a question, so.
Mhm.
It's what we are not prepared to resolve
So I
this
think
year.
I think we can say, unless someone disagrees, that we're maybe saying intervals. Like, we're gonna ask for recommendations for permanent rules, because we are not qualified to talk about what a cannabis cultivation district is. But in the interim, what do we think is fair without overcompensating for one situation? So,
I have trouble reconciling the term densely populated with having an acre to grow.
well, an acre parcel,
An
your
acre,
whole parcel.
yeah,
but yeah.
but we don't allow acre zoning in
Yeah.
our densely populated areas, so. Maybe there is a vacant lot in downtown Montpelier, but it isn't an acre. to me, the real impact would come in residential too. Where you may have half acre zoning, well, but we told them you can't have half acre zoning and you have to allow duplexes and what. Eighth and acre zoning, right?
I think it's
So,
fifth coming out of
so
the natural resources.
if I'm limited to a fifth of an acre, where am I gonna get it? I'd have to buy another lot. But that's in the future. Right
Okay.
now, we
Yeah.
have a lot of residential areas where I own a lot, but then I bought the woods behind me for firewood. We won't talk about that. But I own more than an acre now, even though the house, I think there were half acres in my neighborhood. People bought 2 lots and the house in the middle. There's a lot of residential. And probably res 3 that sometimes had 3 acre zoning, they would be able to grow, but I guess if your neighbor had 3 acres. But it's that 2 that's not densely populated and is most likely to have some space that somebody could grow on. I think it would be a really attractive nuisance.
So I just wanna, we're talking about trying to put something in place for 6 months that isn't too onerous one way or the other.
Well, what happens to the folks in Essex Junction if we do this? Are they gonna
If we
be
do
allowed
which
to
part?
continue? Which won't solve the problem with the neighbors, or are we going to stop them? Which means they might go out of business.
The house gave us a setback that puts them out of business. 50 might also do that or very significantly limit their narrow
Yeah,
parcel to grow as opposed to their entire backyard. I agree, I don't like talking about this one situation without even having heard from either of the parties. And I wish there was something we could do that's fair, but gives Essex Junction the ability to just
Solve
have a
their own
complaint
problem.
driven process around it.
as we said, Massachusetts does that. We've talked numerous times.
Well,
So becoming home rule.
Couldn't they like petition you to look at this one situation in the meantime? So
we have an interim measure allowing municipalities to make decisions. to make their
Well,
own
there are
ordinance.
municipalities that might impact businesses that haven't received any complaints. Or there might-
Other
then we could-
municipalities were, other
Yeah.
municipalities involved, or at least consulted in what the house did.
I don't know that.
Only on this issue, I don't think so. However, I mean, I know Charlotte ran into some issues. The problem with Charlotte though is that they refuse to grant people kind of change of use permits. So you had an existing tomato farm right on the border, or a hemp farm even. And it would have been ideal to move it back away from the road, but they're saying, but you gotta get a change of use permit and you're probably not gonna grant it, so you implement a kind of 50-foot buffer in this situation in Charlotte, that person has to go out of business because they'll have to move their operation and they're caught in this catch-22 if they're not allowed to move their operation.
We're trying to do this at the last minute with no testimony.
I'm not trying to do anything, I'm just trying to present options.
Yeah, and I suggested that we come up with an interim measure because I don't think we're ready to make a final measure. And I do think the rest of the bill is definitely worth moving past it.
I'm going back to the less than an acre CCB has some interim siting authority. Or this part of the bill dies and becomes a recommendations that come back to us.
I think
And then
again,
I
they're
think
saying
it's-
that without standards, they don't want to be a judge and jury kind of thing.
Mhm.
They need us to say it's 50 feet or it's 25 feet.
Right. I guess I'm asking if you could be judge and jury for the next 6 months. Otherwise, I think these are the 2 questions. Do we
Do a 50-foot interim.
well, not even 50 foot, but do we give some flexibility to the CCB to look at complaints and issues in, you know, populated areas less than an acre? Or do we turn this whole part of the bill into a study with recommendations?
I mean, we'll-
Those are our two options.
we can do our best to be objective, but I mean,
Mhm.
just using the Essex Junction case as an example, we're probably either gonna have to, in that situation,
Mhm.
put this guy out of business or annoy all of his neighbors,
Mhm.
letting him stay in business.
That's
And
kind of
we'll-
what we're being asked.
No,
to
I
do
know,
right now,
but
so,
like, we don't
you
have,
know,
like, what's the
yeah.
recourse for anyone who's dissatisfied with our decision?
Right, right.
Rather than be mad at you than us.
Well, it's,
Yeah.
and I can understand, I can
mean,
understand that, but at least,
yeah.
you know, like, you know, they,
But we also have to be thoughtful of each other, so why
Right.
is, you know,
Right.
this community has to be thoughtful with one
Right.
another.
Right, and at least what you would do would
I don't
be
understand this
consistent,
guy.
right,
even if it's problematic, like you could come back to us and tell us
Right.
what happened in an interim 6 months.
Now, if you make a decision, what's the appeals process, if any?
so it's the standard, you know, we'll go through, we'll hire an administrative law judge, there'll be a hearing. The standard is, do we act arbitrarily and capriciously? Do we violate anyone's constitutional
Yeah,
rights?
yeah.
You know, is what we did in line with our rules and were our rules adopted through the kind of proper procedures? It's, so it's very deferential to the board.
Arrested you,
What's that?
for other things you do, it's the same
Oh,
process.
same process, but it's very deferential to us. I mean,
Yeah.
our rules have been approved by Elcar and,
But at the same time, it's transparent and consistent,
For
and it
sure.
answers back
Right.
to us statewide, and I think that's better than.
But this, they can enforce their rules because we said they could make rules. And the rules have been through Elcar and they've been through
Mhm.
legislative to just say now, if the seeds aren't in the ground today, they're gonna be in the ground before this bill ever gets signed. So you've got folks that have now invested, they've got their plants in the ground. Are we gonna go and tell them they have to rototill 50?
Not if they're on more than an acre, and we would be
Well, I
saying,
need- I-
there's a
but I need
complaint and you
to
need to go
see-
over the CCB.
I need to see a picture with an acre and how much 50 feet.
Well,
out of
that's what
I
I'm
think
trying to say.
Representative Byron would be happy to share that with you in this one instance. I'm trying again to, like, I don't know who else can do that on short notice, so I am worried that this bill
yeah.
may simply just, okay.
The thing that somewhat makes sense to me is if you want, like, there's one real situation that we
Yeah.
have, the Essex Junction situation, where
Mhm.
neighbors are not happy. You know, that guy's been growing hemp for years though, so it's the same smell, just like the smell
Mhm.
lasts a little bit longer because you're growing for a little bit longer.
Mhm.
And he's going legally and outdoors, so
Right.
more of it, I mean.
Well, he could grow as
wasn't
much
growing
hemp as he could fit into that little space legally if he wanted to. I mean, hemp is an agricultural product.
Yeah, so before our cannabis bill, he
So-
was growing hemp.
Right. So, to me, it seems like if you put that situation aside, that situation has the possibility of replicating itself in any number of contexts, but it hasn't been.
Mhm.
So putting a moratorium or saying this citing will apply for the next year while the board works, it won't
Yeah.
apply retroactively, it won't fix the Essex Junction problem
Mhm.
in favor of the select board, in favor of the neighbors.
Mhm.
Put a pause on that for a year while the board does the stakeholder engagement process, evaluates kind of various options that you will have. And then, but we'll put a pause on any new kind of densely populated cannabis
Mhm.
cultivation.
That's fair. I mean, I think densely populated is like a different thing.
And I don't think we should create another one of these situations. And I think at some point we should look at that situation and say, what do we wish we should have allowed?
Right.
Just to come up with
What's
standards.
appropriate?
I will say, so what I'm hearing you say is it's likely everyone would be able to keep what they have into perpetuity, or you could come back and say to us, okay, we didn't change their acreage or growing area in their renewal, but going forward, these rules will apply to everyone.
Mm.
You could, as the way that kind of the laws are written now, any new citing requirement that you come up, unless you explicitly state that it's only gonna apply to initial, like new licensees, will apply at renewal to the existing licenses.
Okay.
So, So that's the kind of that's why all of this, what's in the bill currently, if it were to pass the way it is, will impact the existing businesses unless you change it, just say this section will only be in effect for a year and it will only apply to people at their initial licensure, not to renewals. And then you can take a pause on any new business that might implicate, this kind of densely populated area, come back, evaluate kind of what the impact of this provision that's in 612 is to the existing cultivators. And then you can make a kind of rational decision about, can those people move? Do they have room to move their plants elsewhere? 50 feet from the buffer zone? Should it be 100 feet? Should it be 15 or 25? I mean, these are all kind of,
And should it apply retroactively?
should it apply retroactively?
I think that's the thing you need to come back, with. But I do think we aren't ready to make that decision
Right.
today.
And what I wanna be conscious of is, in some ways, this is not an agricultural question. This is us deciding whether or not to allow what's considered a non-agricultural product that gives people a different level of pause in residential areas. I mean, that, at first I was like, well, we're supposed to treat it like the rest of agriculture. Well, it's fair to say that that's a balance of perspective, that, not everybody wants to treat marijuana just like you're growing tomatoes. And in a residential area, we probably need more thoughtful rules.
Right. And different products have different impacts, quite honestly.
Yeah, and this was not a problem that was anticipated at the outset.
Right,
I mean, given our climate, our economists looked at states with similar climates, and they thought that the vast majority of our cultivation was gonna be happening indoors. And then the opposite happens, and 60% of our cultivators are outdoors. So,
Yeah.
That how does not surprise me.
Okay. Does someone wanna try and summarize where we are? That's not me, I just wanna make sure. We would not change any existing. We would not change the status quo for existing growers. We would ask for a set of citing recommendations. In residential areas or around property lines. That would come back to us next year. And that we would hope that those recommendations then impact renewal of licensing going forward.
And the retroactive license.
Yeah.
Renewal of licensing means.
I think what we will be able to provide you is what the impact of various buffers
Yes.
to existing licensees
Yes.
would be, and then you can make just kind of a clear-eyed decision.
Okay, we don't
whether
have
you
ledge
want
council, but
those-
yeah.
Those businesses to be impacted.
Right, so if you could work with me and Michelle.
Okay.
On that language. Is that where people are?
But so we're not doing the 50-foot intro.
Right, we wouldn't do any interim foot,
Well, you might
Okay.
wanna do that, and I say that only because then you're
Okay.
putting pause. If you do an interim, just
Oh,
standard
okay.
setback, then for all new applicants,
so maybe saying the municipality can implement up to a 50-foot setback.
I think or say 50-foot,
either one.
I thought we were putting,
but just
I was
for the
worried
year.
that impacts a lot of people if we don't understand that, would that put a pause on their growing?
It would put a pause on any new people growing with,
Oh, with the new people,
Yeah.
okay, new,
yes.
Well, what do we do about Essex Church?
well, I mean,
well,
that-
then we,
Maybe we can
that's,
do
you're kind of
anything.
punting for
right,
a
we're
year.
making an affirmative,
You're collecting
Yeah.
information over, and I can report back whenever
Right.
you want, January,
Right.
November, whatever.
we're saying we're not picking a winner and loser in
Right.
this one situation that we don't know how it impacts others.
Right, and the eventual.
The Essex people will be mad at us, but.
Right, but if we do decide that that's not a fair impact on the neighborhood, we could always just try to phase it out too. And give them 5 years to change or something like that.
We can come back next year and have a much better
I think
conversation.
we could have.
So now I think I have it then.
Neighbors will be happy about that.
We're gonna ask you to study the impact of the possibilities and what cannabis cultivation did is critically. And then we're going to say, in the interim, there will be no new applications accepted that include growth, cultivation
Or approved, but yes.
Approved.
yes.
In residential.
more than 50 feet from property line,
Without a 50-foot.
without a 50-foot buffer.
And you'll have to, I think you're gonna have to specify residential 1 and 2.
I think we leave that out because I think
Well, then what's a residential area?
we don't say residential area. We just say a new application is given a 50-foot setback in the interim. If that's a huge place, that's not gonna matter to them. If it's something in between, then we're saying it's too in between, like
It's 50 foot from a public road, right? Is that right?
I
that.
read it as a property boundary.
It's a property line.
Property bound,
That's what I read it as.
So if you're
So
out
all
in
property
the
boundary.
middle of nowhere,
yeah, doesn't matter.
50 feet is, I mean, 50 feet is a lot of plants. You can't.
It is 11:59. I mean, I think this is like as simple as we can say, and you know. If you have less than an acre in the middle of nowhere, the neighbor still might have a concern that you're like getting too close to their land with your marijuana, so. I can't do everything.
You can commercially grow on less than an acre.
It's
Maybe
not-
you can't, or maybe.
Yeah,
What's the law? Can I commercially grow in my backyard?
You can commercially grow outdoor cannabis. That was permitted.
Okay,
Yeah.
and
Well, I
he
mean,
didn't say
what should I
where.
say is, you didn't give the full right to farm exemptions to
Right.
outdoor cannabis cultivation, but you gave 6 or 7, including no local zoning, no
you
activity.
did one last year.
While you're here, so I will give people the language to look at, but that's how we'll move forward, and if people want more language, we can consider that maybe for.
Say it one more time.
The Cannabis Control Board will lead a stakeholder group to look at the impact of any changes to setbacks, plus what a cannabis cultivation district is or should be. And any new applications will not be approved for a new business that includes outdoor cultivation within 50 feet of a property boundary.
That
In
those
the, I
include-
do wanna, okay,
And the interim,
That
that
includes,
is the intro.
What
And that
about folks
goes-
that got their seeds in the ground right now?
they won't have their seats in the.
They would have had to go through their application process
They
to
won't
do
have
that.
I
So
don't know.
it will be effective upon passage. I don't think we can do, I don't know about the seeds in the ground.
Well, they'll have the seeds in the ground by the time this gets passed.
But they know seeds are very finicky in the cannabis world. You can't just sort of like throw some seeds around because you want to pass a law. I will say, while you're still sitting here, I'm very sympathetic to moving the fund from ACCD to the Cannabis Control Board. Because ACCD Economic Development's told us they don't even want to do business grants for flood impacted areas right now. So it seems like they are really, not living into their capacity to administer this. So unless you have like a firm
I do actually have burning
Opposition.
opposition on this one. You know,
Yeah.
we've talked about this quite a bit. We've talked about it with a number of stakeholders, probably a lot of the same people that you've heard. And we very recently had a conversation, which has been ongoing, but it kind of come to Jesus conversation with ACCD about this.
Yeah.
My concern about moving into the Cannabis Control Board really comes down to, we are regulators. We are trying to ensure compliance and enforce our
Mhm.
regulations, which could mean that we need to fine people or revoke their licenses or suspend their licenses, all the full gamut of possibilities. To kind of mix our message with, we're also supposed to be providing kind of the technical assistance and support and potentially funds and grants that then, it's kind of like, Doug Hoffer's been on the airwaves quite a bit with this EB5 report that he just released. And his number one kind of takeaway was the same agency that regulates a business shouldn't also be in
Right.
charge of promoting it.
Yes.
And I just feel like it puts us in a very untenable position. We have to kind of hire a position to do this, put a firewall between that person and the rest of the agency.
Right.
I think that a lot of the people that have accessed this fund, a lot of our social equity applicants, have found great value in it. However, I think ACCD's kind of thinking on this is what we do. We can certainly administer it. All we knew when we were given this money is it was a one-time contribution, $500,000. So like, we didn't know if we should dedicate staff to doing this. They did dedicate a staff person to oversee it. We didn't know if we should be thinking about sustainable impact programs. We didn't know. We thought this was going to be kind of a one and done situation. And then when the money came back the following year, now that they haven't even expended all of it because they just don't know like how are we. I think they wanted some clarity that we want.
Question, can we give it to the Land Access and Opportunity Board?
Do they have a cannabis nexus? Because this is the
It has
language around this is it's meant for technical assistance and support. Fund, like a revolving loan fund, grants for social equity businesses.
I mean, LAOB, the nexus is social equity businesses that involve agricultural products essentially.
And we could add to
And
their,
they, I mean, I trust them more to give the money to the most marginalized right now than I trust.
but they may not have the technical assistance.
Well, but they would have the capacity to hire somebody to focus specifically.
Or
on
direct
that.
them to something like the law school, small business group.
Well, I mean, they would have the money, I mean, ACCP is hiring somebody and doing a random job of this right now, so.
They assign one of their existing employees to
Okay,
this as one of their kind of duties. And you know, the thing is I don't think what ACCD really fully grasped. And first of all, the timing of this was a little bit crazy. We started licensing people in May of 2022.
mhm,
The fund didn't even come into existence by statute until October of 2022.
mhm,
So we had already seen almost a full harvest cycle and
Yeah.
people kind of like failing
right,
in the first year before the money, before the
Right.
fund was even created, let alone they put out RFPs for
Right.
technical assistance or you gave any sort of grants or loans to people.
right.
So it was, you know.
To me, the social equity part is a skill
Right,
and a
yes.
specific set of, you know, principles and ideas that are important in this. And it sounds like, you know, the ACCD, I don't think has those
Yeah,
in spades. So, I'm just telling the committee, there are a lot of folks in the industry who don't want to see this continue to live with ACCD. ACCD doesn't want to continue to live with this. And I'm gonna look at the Land Access and Opportunity Board.
yeah, and wherever it
Moving
ends up,
on.
it's fine. You
Yeah.
know, we have been.
Yeah, sure.
I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
by statute, it's the CCB, Office of Racial Equity and ACCD meet about this fund. We're not in charge of what contracts they approve or how they distribute money, but we do have a voice, a seat at the table.
Mhm.
And we certainly kind of work with them to kind of, you know, matchmake our social equity
Right.
applicants.
But kind of none of those people are looking at social equity and agriculture and land use
Yeah.
the way that the LAOB
Sure.
is doing.
Yeah, I just don't know enough about it.
Mhm.
But if it, you know, this is, you know, whoever is best equipped to kind
Yeah.
of work.
Okay.
With these.
So that kind of takes care of the direction that we're headed on those two pieces. We're going to keep talking about advertising. I didn't hear enough movement around events.
Okay.
But we're gonna keep looking at the advertising piece. I didn't hear enough about events being of interest to a majority of the committee to keep looking at. But advertising was of interest. Am I getting that right? Both.
I think so.
Yeah, you help me look at that more. So we'll take this up again. Thank you for being with us on
Of
short
course,
notice.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
pleasure.
So committee